start again. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, lovely people. I'm so happy that we're here for another episode of Ask the Expert. And again, I have asked Adrian Hanks to come with me and discuss a topic that is quite a hot topic in loving life after loss in the space of grief, and that is how to deal with family. And there are quite a few different approaches, and Adrian and I had a quick chat behind the scenes, as we always do before we come live to you. And I just want to set the scene here a little bit. We will be talking about this topic more from a psychological, emotional, mental mindset sort of perspective. I do understand that there might also be a lot of legal issues coming up when it comes to dealing with family in the space of grief. This is not the topic for today, so we will not be looking at it from a legal perspective. I can give you a sneak peek. I actually do have a beautiful lawyer who will come to us into the group for an Ask the Expert episode, and Linda and I will be speaking about a few different very common questions in the legal space when it comes to a loss in the family, and so we will keep these questions for them. However, if there are any pressing questions from a legal perspective, please do feel free to ask them, and I can see how I can pass them on, or please contact your lawyer or your legal support team. So that is just a quick disclaimer that I wanted to put out there to set the scene. And without further ado, Adrian, as always, can you do a quick introduction for all the new members in the group? Because every month we collect more and more members, and the group is growing nicely and steadily. And please do us the honor to introduce yourself. Welcome again.
Thank you. So firstly, once again, thank you for inviting me onto the show. I love being on here. We've done a few now, and each month,
always my pleasure.
The different topics. It's really good to be able to share that. So a little bit of a background for myself. I'm in my second marriage, and I've got 6 adult children, and I've got 4 granddaughters and a grandson on the way in a few months' time. I'm very excited.
Yay.
And just
congratulations.
Thank you. And from a professional perspective, I've been in the coaching and psychotherapy space for over 20 years. And obviously a lot of clients who come to me are working in that grief space of losing partners, and some background into where I had quite a lot of experience. I used to work with Dr. Ian Gawler in Victoria on a cancer retreat center. So of course we dealt with lots of grief with people passing from cancer. So hundreds and hundreds of people over the 3.5 years I was there. We were dealing with grief all the time. So we used to do a lot of ceremony and a lot of support in that space to help people through the grief. So when I got invited on to be on here, I felt all the experience I've had over the years sort of has culminated to be here on this show. So I'm very excited to be, impart some information, some insight, and some wisdom, if I can, as well, to support people who are on the journey.
Yeah, it is so beautiful to have you here, Adrian, because it is always nice to invite other experts into the field to, come from a different perspective, or sometimes even share perspectives that are really, really important to highlight. And today's topic is really quite a deep one, and I feel we could fill many, many sessions with that, but we really try to give some, the essence of a couple of things that we wanted to highlight. And I'm going to hand it straight back to you, because you have already taken a couple of points from that. When it comes to dealing with family, I think one statement is quite fair to say. Sometimes it's quite easy that emotions run high, in particular when it comes to a loss, in particular when it comes to grief, where there are so many different perspectives and so many different emotions, sometimes so many of them in a very, very short time frame. So I hand it back to you, Adrian. Give us a bit of an overview of the things that you have already collected that you want to share with us.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think it's really, really, really important to state your needs in your journey from the passing. Whether that's just imminent and whether it's just happened or whether it's even long term. If you haven't written what I would call your needs list, I'd be suggesting everybody sits for a little while and writes down their needs, their physical needs, emotional needs, mental needs, spiritual needs, financial needs, whatever they are. Get that complete, because if you meet a family member and you are in a high emotional state, it's easy to forget what one's needs are. And I think even if you say to the person, look, I've written my needs down because I had a sense this might get emotional, and I'm actually going to revert back to my notes, just like public speakers do sometimes, they come back to their notes. And I think it's really important to be clear on them. So just those heading, the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, the financial, and what other support needs to be there as well. Have it written, because what happens when we meet with others, particularly family members, anger can rise, guilt can rise, resentment can rise, and all those trigger points can rise in ourselves, but also in others as well. And if you get into that heated space, I say it's really easy to lose one's mindset and say things perhaps you don't want to say, or not set the scene and saying what you really need is your needs. And one of the needs might be, right now, I really need to be angry. Right now, I really need to feel into deep sobbing, whatever that need is.
Yeah.
And also remembering, Maria, I think is really important, is every single member of the family will grieve differently.
Yes. Oh,
some it will be inward.
Absolutely.
Some it will be outward. Some of it will be projected on others, and maybe yourself included.
Yeah.
So I think awareness around, and once again, it could be a case of doing a little bit of note taking, a bit of journaling, and just getting clear on how you feel or how you've experienced others in their emotional states. You can be prepared for that as well. I will say preparation is king.
Yeah, if it's okay, I just want to quickly pause you on this one, only because it just triggered a memory for me that I want to very quickly share. Because at the very beginning stages, and I want to share this here because I feel that a lot of people might really, really relate to this deeply, and I hope it opens something up for you as well. Because at the beginning stages, I'm actually having goosebumps sharing this. When Rob passed, I was so in the me space, in my pain, how I feel, how intense it was for us in these early stages, that I had no emotional capacity to think about how others might feel. I had a little bit of that for Rob's immediate family, obviously, but I couldn't go beyond that. I had no capacity left. And I want to say two things here. First of all, that's absolutely okay. This is your pain, this is your grief, and this is really intense for you. But I also say it was very, very healing for me once I got to that space where I had capacity left to walk back into that space and make sense of it, to step out of that judgment, as in you judging me, or you're not getting me, or you, and come back to this space, or come to that space, not back to the space because it's something I had to heal to grow to, come to a space where I thought, you know what, you and I are different people. You grieve Rob differently to how I grieved him, and that's okay. And sometimes that even means that we might go different paths, sometimes just for a while and sometimes forever, and that's okay. But to not say this is right or this is wrong, but this is my way and this is your way. And that's just what came up for me. And that was a really, really big thing for me when I got to that space. And I just wanted to quickly share that. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. And I think it's really important to recognize that, everybody will be different. And I think getting very clear on your own grief process, and to be true with that grief process with your family members. Try not to hide that true grief process that is needed for oneself. I think it's really important, because in family, there are hierarchical systems in families, and those that are, we become subservient to sometimes, and we change our behavior, particularly around perhaps parents and older siblings. I think it's really important to follow one's true grieving process. It's so important, and allowing that to unfold as it's meant to. And as you say, judgment can come up, self-judgment and judgment on others, and judgment from others to ourselves. So just being aware of when that trigger of judgment comes up as well. It's it's so essential. But back to the recommendation is write things down. Write things down. Write down exactly what your needs are, what your wants are, what your desires are for the process. But maybe each need is different for each family member. But spend some time today, tomorrow, this week, if you haven't done that already, on that process. I said to you, Marie, before we come on, it's a little bit like when you go into a birthing, you have a birthing plan. you know.
Mhm.
It's really, you have your clarity, because when you're giving birth, you can't think about your needs. You're just
Yeah.
focused on giving birth. And grieving's a bit like
Mm.
that. It's really hard to stay focused on one's needs when you're in grief. So please, you
Mm.
know, have your little book, have it written down, carry it with you,
Mm.
and use that. Something else I'd like to share is on that one big trigger, and I'm sure I'd love for you to share something on this, because I know you've been through it, we spoke about it,
Mm.
is when we get to the will, because family wills can
Mm.
totally break families. I've
Yeah.
seen it, I've had clients with it, I've had friends with it, I've had family members with it, that when that will is produced and somebody is not happy,
Mm.
it can be devastating. So I
Yeah.
don't know, Marie, whether you have some experience in, you know, in that space with family or clients, that you
Yeah.
can share something on that space of
I
the will.
have to say, with family, luckily, no. So I'm very, very blessed that
Okay.
everybody, was just on the same page. We just wanted, I mean, it was just Rob, the boys, and I. So none of the siblings would have had any veto on that. That, obviously the money that we had from the life insurance went to us as a family of three. And I don't think there were any legal issues around that anyway, but even if there were, so the family would have been completely supportive of that. So I am very lucky and very, very blessed with the family I married into. So, there's luckily no experience there. I do have a lot of experience with clients of mine or members in the group that have shared, or even outside the group, where I've read so many issues around money, around ashes, unfortunately, around belongings, around the house they lived in, And what I find such a shame is when it comes to anything materialistic, because at the end of the day, we can't take any of that with us anyway. And I think there's nothing more important than the emotional state of a person that's grieving. And yeah, you can say whatever you want around this topic, that, we are human beings and none of us is perfect. Yet for me, it is always such a shame. And I don't know what you think or feel about this, Adrian. I always feel the absolute ideal scenario is when you can bring somebody in as a mediator to take the emotion out of it. Yet not everybody's open to that, but I think that would be a very, very good approach to, as you said with your list, if you know it's getting emotional, maybe just write it down. And do the same thing with belongings. Why not make a list? And the ashes, that's a really, really intense topic, because there are so many emotions. It's not materialistic belonging, it is emotional. What happens with the ashes, and not everybody knows what the loved one's wishes were, and even if they are not always respected, because sometimes people go like, but this is my son, or this is my husband, or I need to make a decision. And I'm going to go very personal here for a moment, because when Rob passed away, Paul, his younger brother, said to me very, very early on that mum and dad, which is Rob's parents, would want some of Rob's ashes. And my immediate reaction, I didn't say it, I just felt it, and I thought, I need to sit with that. I did not want to say it out loud. I can share it now. My immediate reaction was, there is no way I could part his ashes. To me, it was like cutting him into pieces. That's how I felt at the very beginning. And luckily, I allowed myself to sit with it. And I think that's a very good advice for anything. If there is strong emotion, just allow yourself to sit with it. You don't need to act upon every emotion instantly. That's a big learning I had over the years. And the more I sat with it, the more I was at peace with it, because I realized, you know what, at the end of the day, they are only ashes. And Rob was their son, like my mother-in-law, she gave birth to him. Without them, I would have never had the pleasure of being married to him. So I instantly felt like, why on earth could I ever put my needs above theirs? And the more I let go of that thought, I can't possibly, the more at peace I was. And now I find it actually quite beautiful that there is a piece of Rob, or, you know, his ashes, in different places. We spread the ashes on places where we holidayed together. We spread his ashes into the ocean, the most part of it, which was his wish. We have some of it with Rob's parents, a little bit still left in our home. So there is so much peace around that now. And I just felt like sharing that, because that is often a very, very big topic as well when it comes to family disputes after a loss. What happens with the ashes? Just sit with it and imagine, you know, your loved one, like everybody having a piece of him, not in a flesh and physical sense of way, but in an energetic and love sense of way. And the more you share love, the more it grows. So I had that approach, and it gave me so much peace. And I truly hope that whoever listens to this might get something away from that as well.
Yeah, I think the idea, when I was working with Ian Gawler in Victoria, we had a cancer retreat centre for young people, and one of the young guys on there, he'd been to see the oncologist. He'd been given 3 months to live. He wanted to come to the foundation to, you know, learn meditation and do a few different things. He was a beautiful young guy. He was 17 years old, and I was on the children's program working with him. And he actually prepared his funeral because he knew, with his uncle, he built his coffin, he arranged everything, and he was clear where all his ashes were going to go. And I was very lucky to receive a little container, in the old days, there was a little black photographic film container with some ashes in there. He wanted to spread on the foundation. And he had his ashes spread by a police helicopter from the sky, from the top of a mountain, from lots of places. And his idea was, I want to be everywhere in the world. So his wishes were followed, and everybody had a little piece, and we spread it in places. I'm just getting goosebumps while I'm speaking.
I'm having goosebumps just listening to you. It's incredible.
And it was just beautiful. So I think the importance of that moment, if people are still about to venture into that process, that's where you got really clear on your needs, and also get clear on what the family needs are. And that's a huge, big discussion. You know, if the cremation is going to happen and there are ashes to share or to hold, that discussion could be potentially, you know, quite eruptive. It could lead into lots of emotion. So it's about getting really clear on one's needs, but also learning to listen to other people's needs. And I think that's sometimes, you mentioned before, the mediator. Sometimes a professional mediator or coach or counselor is a really good space to go to hold that space in negotiation. It's sometimes really important, particularly if you know there's going to be tension. It's so. So that, you know, the ashes are one. The will, as I mentioned before, could be quite contentious. So get clear on, you know, who's the executor of the will, who's going to work in that space with you. I've had a few friends who've been through the will process in the last few years, and it was not a very pretty sight. It was pretty awful for the individuals, because people were contesting the will, and then of course the lawyers are the ones that win at the end of the day, because they take the chunk. But yeah, it's a tough one. A couple of other things I got in here is we mentioned, we had a conversation about how to get clarity around some of these questions or bringing, and you mentioned family constellations. So I'd like to bring that in, because having a system, sometimes it's good to just talk to somebody one-on-one to, you know, work through what one needs to work through. But if it's a complicated family situation, one great way to do is to dramatize that into like if you like, a role play or a situation. And I know you love your family constellations. I've done a few constellations myself. I know a few.
Me too. I love it.
Facilitators myself, and a few people do it slightly differently, but
can we just, because I'm very aware that there is still, it's still a sort of new thing in Australia. In Europe, it's very popular. And for those in Australia, I don't even know about the US, how popular it is or not, but should we maybe explain just the basics of family constellation and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Are you a facilitator yourself, Maria?
I am, yeah.
Yeah. So would you like to explain, as the facilitator, you know,
I'm happy to give my little spiel that I usually do, and then you can add yours if you want to. I'm quite happy with it. So for like absolute simplicity, I often refer to family constellation as a human board game. So what happens in a family constellation is that you take representatives of the family, which can be done with other humans, as in, people who volunteer, who come together in a group and stand in for the people in your family to represent family members, to have that role play. But it can also be done with cups or any other objects, really. So if it's just you doing a family constellation, I always do a family constellation at the VIP days that I run. So it's just me and the client, and I literally use cups, and you put as many cups as you have family members on the table. And basically I use the handle as a nose, so you know in which direction that person is looking. And I get the person, we refer to it as the focus. I'm not really sure what you call it, but the focus is like you, the person who represents you is referred to as the focus. And you put the focus in there, and the family members around on the table or in a room if it's done with real human beings. And then you look at the entire picture when you're done. When people are put on that field, in that room, on the table, then you look at the entire picture, and it's so beautiful for you because you are not in the picture, you're standing outside. So it gives you the outside perspective. And then when you do it with real humans, you can get feedback from them, how they felt. Was it forceful? Does it feel comfortable? Does it not? People don't have to know anything about your family situation. They just feel, and it's incredible the feedback that you get. But even if you just do it with cups, you see from the dynamic how they are put on the table. Who is close to who looks at who looks away from who. And in particular, when it comes to a death in the family, it's incredible because you always put that loved one that has passed over in a constellation as well. And what happens when that cup or that person is taking out, how it affects the rest of the dynamic. Every time it gives me goosebumps. It is really incredible to see that from an outside perspective and what effect it has on you and the rest of the family. So that is really very much in a nutshell. People still go like, how on earth does this work? And it's just very, very magical to me to run family constellations, because there's always such a beautiful, beautiful outcome and realizations that come through that.
Yeah.
Please fill in the gaps if I left anything out.
So what I love about it, and you touched on this, Marie, was rather than being in the center and being subjective, one gets an absolutely objective view of what's happening. And I think that is so important because, as we've mentioned before, when you're deeply in the emotion, it's hard to be in the left brain and sort of see things from a logical reality perspective. So by stepping out of it and seeing it from a more of an objective perspective, one can get so much clarity, particularly on the other family members. You may have Auntie Edith, who's in the family, that is generally nice and quiet and demure and doesn't say very much. But when she's in the constellation, she's represented by somebody. Maybe for the first time, you're going to hear or feel what she really has to say.
Yeah.
It gives the, if you like, the players, the representatives of the family members in there, that opportunity to feel into what the family member may feel like saying, but may be too shy or too afraid to say to other family members. And so I think the magic of family constellation is that it works on such a subtle level. And if one's aware of those subtleties from an objective perspective rather than subjective, one can start to understand the whole dynamic rather than just one's own relationship to what's going on. So
that sounds like a wrap. I need to wrap my brain around this objective perspective rather than subjective. Whoa.
Yeah, and that's what I use a lot in my therapy. I get my client to sort of step aside and we put the representation in to represent them. It's a very similar process with a bit sort of Gestalt style, and then we get them to feel what they're seeing, what they're feeling from the objective. And it's so easy for them to say, well, I can see myself as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old. This is what I see. This is it's almost like we're replaying the situation on video and we're watching it all over again.
Yeah.
When we use like family constellations, it can be such a great resource. So once again, the recommendation is family constellations or something similar as a resource
Literally, exactly. Just Google it in your area. And if you want recommendations around Sydney, I can certainly give you those as well. One thing I forgot to mention with the family constellation, when you do it with real people, which is my favorite part of the entire constellation, is at the very end of it, when you're done with the constellation, when you did your adjusting, your asking questions and all of that, to then, you know, if you're doing the constellation, you are replaced with the focus, which is the person representing you. You then stand in the constellation. So at the very end, you do get your subjective perspective back. And that is just so incredible when you then, when you've done the adjustments, when you ask your questions, when you had your learnings, when you did your healing, to then step back into it. And how does it feel now? And remember, this is all role play. So when you have this moment of how does it feel now, there's opportunity in that. You can then take that into the real world and take that healing and the learning into the real world. And that to me is where the magic happens. So, yeah.
It's a very magical process. And that's, I've got a few friends who are constellation facilitators. And, you know,
yeah. So if in which area are you, in case somebody wants recommendations?
I'm on the Gold Coast. So I know a facilitator in the in Sunshine Coast. I know a facilitator here on the Gold Coast, and also a facilitator.
So please do reach out if you guys, anybody listening to this, want recommendations. Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Sydney. Adrian and I can certainly help you out with that, or simply just Google it. You know, I always prefer when it comes with recommendations, because it is good to know if somebody does a really good constellation. There's different facilitators, different methods out there, but I just love it.
Yeah, there's those that follow more the traditional line, and some have sort of stepped out and created their own, and it's a little bit different. And I've experienced a few different types. So yeah, I love it. So yeah, having that as a resource, I think is really, really important. And reaching out and back into the sort of groove of where we're going with people is find that support person that can help you within the family, because it's good to get a professional from outside who doesn't know the family, but having somebody within the family to support, because they know you, they understand you more, they get your emotions more. So what I often do if I'm doing family work with families is I do what I call the concentric circle. I put the person in the middle, the client or the person in the middle, and then we do about 5 different rings, and we write or we name the close family members in the inner circle. And then the next people, and then the next, until you sort of get to the third cousins or whoever you're working with, you don't know very well. And then you look at the whole complete circle and say, one, who in there do I trust the most? Which one do I connect with the most? Where's the synergy the most? And you pick 2 or 3 people. And you might be surprised if you do that process, that those that you think are the closest on the inside are not always the closest. It could be some family member on the outside that you haven't seen for a while, but you know there's a connection, and that's the person to call or phone or email or connect to. So that concentric circle process is really good to hone in on, and you name all your family.
So beautiful.
It's a really good process, because it becomes a visual process. And once again, it's an objective process again, and then you feel into it once you've been objective, and you see which family member am I going to connect with. And it could be just Auntie Edith that you haven't seen for 2 or 3 years, but you know that when you did meet, there was a beautiful connection and you understood each other.
Yeah.
So that would be the person.
I love this, because like even just listening to you, I was going through, you know, he's in the inner circle, who do I trust the most, and then going out, and then we're like, it might be on the outer circle, or, you know, who you really trust. And I instantly like, yeah, my godfather, he's not in my inner circle, but he's the one person I trust the most. And even if we don't speak for a couple of months or years even, there is this instant connection and that instant trust, like 100% trust. And that is really beautiful. I literally just mentioned him in my life on Monday, and now he comes up again. So yeah, time to reach out again.
But if I got you to draw that concentric circle, as you said, he may not be in that inner circle with you.
No, he was in the third circle.
Yeah, there we go.
So isn't that incredible? Yeah.
So objectively, you can see that, and then you can name him and say, right, I know who I need to contact today because he's the one I trust the most.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great exercise. So I call it
the
concentric circle process.
Yeah.
And you can use it for lots of things. If you're struggling in your life, or you've got anything going on, I highly recommend doing that concentric
with your
circle.
friends as well, I guess.
You can do a friend circle and a family one, or you can combine them.
Mm.
It's just a really, I use that a fair bit in my therapy work with people. And
Oh, that's
it's
my
just,
gift for me today. I love this.
yeah,
This is such a beautiful idea.
yeah.
Mm.
And what you can do, you can even draw a blank one and then, photocopy a few off and have them on the ready to
Yeah,
go, and then use them for
yeah.
whenever you need them. It's a really good
Ooh,
process.
I love it.
Because I think,
Mm.
because the topic for today is how do I deal with family members? So
Mm.
I just want to jump in a little bit and go, when you have that difficult family member, the one that you may be rubbing up against and you're not gelling
Mhm.
with, and there's conflict, how do you deal with that individual member? Or maybe there's a couple. So I just want to touch on that, and you might have something to share from personal as well on this. Is firstly, it's like working out what the relationship is with that individual. What is the potential
Mhm.
conflict that's going to arise? And one, how can you take responsibility for not bringing those triggers in to trigger that person? And also,
Mm.
if you know you're going to get triggered by that, how can you prepare yourself to come into that conversation, that meeting with that person?
Yeah.
Preparation, preparation,
Mm.
preparation.
Yeah.
It's key. And if you need
Yeah.
a third person to be there, whether it's a family member or professional, I'd
Mm.
highly recommend you bring that third person in. It's like couples counseling, having that third person in there just
Mm.
alleviates that potential
Yeah.
conflict in that conversation.
Yeah.
So, once again, in your needs list, with each of
Mhm.
those individuals that you've now put on your concentric circle list, maybe you
Yeah.
can, the addition to that list then is, how do I relate to each of my family members?
Mhm.
You might do a big 10 for really well and a 9 and then a 1 for those that you don't relate well.
Mhm.
And then you realize, well, next week I have to have a meeting with Uncle Brian, who's number 3. So
Mhm.
how am I going to prepare for that? So that's going to be different than dealing with Auntie Edith, who's a number 10. So
Mhm.
having some understanding of each family member, so a little bit like a constellation again,
Mhm.
understanding how that relationship is going to happen with each one. Because if we
Yeah.
don't prepare and we're in grief and we're not able to hold, that's when the eruptions happen. That's when the conflict happens.
Yeah.
So taking some personal responsibility,
Mm.
step into the communication,
Mm.
conversation, meeting is really, really
Yeah.
important. So,
And it's sometimes really quite tricky, taking responsibility when you are in such a deep emotional state because your logical brain often switches off when you are in emotion. So that's why I love what you said, preparation is key. And two things came up for me, two keywords in that. One is kindness and one is intention. I think the number one thing I want to really bring across here is to be kind to yourself in that process. It is such an out of the norm situation that you're dealing with here right now that you really, really need to extend yourself some kindness in the process. We all make mistakes as human beings, and we all can get emotional. So when these things happen, please be kind to yourself. And the second thing is remember that this is my perspective on it, but I'm just going to say it, that usually there is a good intention behind whatever action it is that might trigger you. And often that is very, very difficult to see when you're in the emotion. And that's when things like outside perspective, the circle exercise or family constellation can really help because you go into the outside perspective. But kindness and intention are two keywords for me here. Be kind to yourself. And remember, I like to trust that there is good intention behind the actions. Even when it comes to disputes over a will, there's often just their own grief or their own, I want to feel close to this person, I need to have this. There's often a need, a want, a different perspective behind that, where very often the intention or the driving factor is surprisingly still love. And that is sometimes really difficult to see. So please allow yourself to have help from the outside or from the inside, like speaking of inner circle family, or even things like uh, inner child, inner higher self, working with these factors as well is really quite magical in this process.
Yeah, it is. And what I'd also like to touch on, Marie, because we sort of touched on family members as if they're sort of,
Mm.
uncles and aunties, mothers, sisters. I just want to touch on children for a moment. And of course, this is
Yes,
where you
please, of
come in,
course.
because
Mm.
dealing with children in grief, losing a part, particularly a father, is different than any other family member, like totally different.
Mm.
Mothers or fathers and uncles and cousins. But when you have children involved, and you've been through this experience yourself, I got
Mm.
goosebumps again talking about it.
Mm.
I'm actually working with somebody at the moment who's 17, a young guy. He's really angry. He's taking it out on his mum. He's swearing at her, yelling at her, like he's going absolutely
Mm.
crazy. Like, she is almost unable to cope with him. And he's 17 and
Mm.
his father died when he was 11. And he
Mm.
hasn't really had the support to grieve through it or work through his anger, his
Yeah.
the guilt, all those things come up. So I'm working with him slowly and carefully as a
Mm.
17-year-old. And he's right on the edge of
Yeah.
dynamite. Like he's ready to explode and,
Yeah.
potentially do something, crazy to somebody or to himself at any moment,
Mm.
because he's been pent up for 5 or 6 years where he hasn't had the support for many
Yeah.
reasons. So I just want to touch really quite seriously on how to deal with children in this space,
Mm.
because they have to be able to agree, they have to be able to speak, they have to be able to say how they're feeling. And sometimes as parents or uncles and aunties, we don't want to hear what they have to say.
Mm.
So so just like, can you share something maybe about your experience?
Mm.
Because it's
Yeah.
close to where you've been. I haven't
Yeah.
I
It's
haven't had
very
that
close to home.
experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 So first of all, there's definitely a huge difference in terms of how old the children are. I can speak from my perspective. Len and Jed were 10 and 8 when Rob passed away, and the tricky part for me in holding space for my own kids when they were grieving was that they dealt with the passing of Rob so differently. So one talked about it all the time. Every single night there was tears and crying, and the other one didn't want to cry, didn't want to talk about it, didn't, and then it switched over as well. So they were actually hardly at all on the same page for the first 3-4 years. And only in the last 1 to 2 years, because we're going on 5 years now in June, have we come to a space where I feel the boys have grown so much through that. I'm not just talking physically, that too, but on an emotional level, they've become such mature, incredible young adults. They're both teenagers now, where they have a level of communication that blows me away. And I get this reflected back to me so often by other parents where they said, your boys really, really stand out in the way they communicate. And this gives me so much reassurance because, Adrian, I've shared this quite openly in my group. Last year, I've gone back into therapy because I had this anxiety come up for me quite intensely after my father-in-law passed away. We were in the room with him when he passed, and Flynn and Jet were there with me, and it re-triggered, deeply. And that brought up anxiety for me. Did I do the right thing by them? Did I create the right space for their grief? And luckily, the answer was yes. And I worked through that with a therapist, but I also got a very, very clear yes from both my boys, which was incredible. So I did ask them to come to therapy with me once, and I sold it to them. It sounds very terrible when I say it like that, but I said, I need your support there. I need to work through this, and I'd really, really appreciate if you would come with me. I didn't make it about you need therapy and you need to talk. I made it about me because that's what I needed. Of course, knowing in the back of my head and in the back of my heart that it will help them as well when they come along. And it was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. And I have to say, we have come to a level now where these topics just come up organically every now and then over dinner. That is the one thing that I always insist on, that we sit together at the dinner table. And these conversations come up. And I think the most general recommendation that I can give straight from my heart is to keep the lines of communication open. Don't force it. Don't try to talk about it every day and every night, and keep it natural. There were days where we didn't talk about Rob, sometimes maybe even weeks. I don't know. I didn't keep count. And then there were other days where we talk about him all the time, but it's just such a natural ebb and flow that you go through. And I think the most important part is to never ever force anything, and just be present as can be. And that's sometimes the trickiest thing when you're going through your own grief, to be fully present to somebody else's, even if they're your kids and they're so close to you. But it can be really difficult at times when you're dealing with such deep emotions. So it's really tricky to come up with one big solution. But for me, if I have to boil it down, it's those two: be present and keep the lines of communication open. That is really the two most important things. Everybody's got such different needs, including your kids.
Absolutely. And two aspects to this that I'd like to add as well is, we have the children who are the children in the home that we see and we experience every day as parents. And then there's the child that goes to school or goes into the social scene, and they can be absolutely opposite of what they are in the home. So having somebody on the outside looking in and watching out for them, whether that's a teacher or somebody in the community, is a great resource to have, because we don't always know really what our children are doing in school or in the social space. And how are they interacting with other children? How are they interacting with their peers? Are they openly talking and grieving with their peers? Are they unable to do that because they're being teased? All those questions. I think having a handle and an understanding of the child outside of the home. This is what's happening with the 17-year-old that I'm working with. His mum, sees him in the home as one, but when he's on the outside, he's a very different child. He's getting into trouble, and she wasn't aware of it, and he was mucking up and getting him, with the police and different things. And it's because he's grieving, he's angry, and unfortunately the police weren't seeing that or understanding that, so we're having to deal with the police and the services, because they're two different children, in the home child and out the home child. So I think becoming aware of that as a parent, or uncle or an auntie, whatever relationship you have with a child, is really important to follow through on. That absolute awareness of where the child is at in their grieving process. And as you said,
I think
they grieve differently. You're totally different.
This just triggered another idea for me that I want to share here, because it took me 1.5 years to realize that Flynn had never shared at school that his dad passed away.
Here we go.
And I was gobsmacked at first. It came up in a conversation with the teacher, the parent-teacher interview, where I talk about Father's Day coming up, and then all of a sudden it dawned on me, and I said, do you actually know that Flynn's dad passed away? And he said, no, I didn't. And then it clicked, and I said, of course not. Why would it even come up? Flynn wouldn't go up to a teacher and say, hey, by the way, my dad died, a couple of years ago. None of the kids would do that. And I sat with that because it shocked me at first. And then I realized it's completely normal. Why would it come up? Why would they say that? And B, most kids don't want to be seen as, the dude whose dad passed away. They don't want that. They just want to be normal. They want to be seen as normal kids. But it doesn't mean that they don't have these emotional triggers. When there's Father's Day, when there's all the other dads at school, at the sausage sizzle, whatever, there are triggers. So around these times when things like Father's Day coming up, to be aware. And as you said, Adrian, to have people in the outside world, i.e. a school counselor or their year teacher, or, somebody that you can talk to and say, can you just please keep an eye on my boys that day, or on your kids, And I did do that without Flynn and Jed knowing, because I didn't want them to feel there's something wrong or there's something this. I just wanted somebody to be aware, just somebody to be aware. And I said, I don't even want you to talk to them about it. I just want you to be aware so you can keep an eye on them. And every time I got this feedback, it's like, they're happy, they're good, they're in a good space. And having a school counselor there, your kids might not be ready to talk to them, or might be past that stage where they want to talk to them. But having that connection, somebody to keep an eye on them, I can highly recommend that. I found that very helpful and very beautiful over the years. So that's a really good thing to think about.
Yeah, well, it brings you some relief too, doesn't it? Because, you don't have to have the worry every day that, there's somebody out there with eyes on your child. which is a great relief as well. You're not carrying that extra burden of having to look after
Mm.
the children as well. So look, we've given, quite a few tips on
Yeah.
that, but really understanding the child. And if you're not a parent, even if it's your nephew or your niece, or your granddaughter or your grandson, even from that perspective, are you aware of that child in terms of that family constellation space?
Yeah.
Is there some, so probably what I'd like to pose is there something more that the listeners and watchers today can do for those children in that family where somebody has passed? So I just want that awareness to drop in for everybody watching and listening
Yeah.
in. Might
Thank you.
be your son or daughter. It could be a niece or a nephew or such. But just that awareness and supporting that, I think it's really important because the children need holding, and they really do. It's I've had that in the family myself, and I've had friends who've got the children, and it's they do it tough. They do it tough.
Yeah.
So let's support the children.
Adrian, thank you so much for bringing that up. Thank you for everything that you shared today. I just want to put it out there for anybody listening to this. I know we went way over time today, but it is a really huge topic, how to deal with family. There is no straightforward one-size-fits-all answer because every family is so different. Every constellation of a family is different. And we go through different stages every day. So I want to bring it back to please be kind to yourself. Please keep the lines of communication open, not just with your children, but with the outside world. And coming back to one of the things that you suggested, Adrian, when you know that it might be emotional, write a list of things, of points that you want to bring across, and maybe start with that. I always suggest that you communicate directly if you can, because the written word often gets interpreted in the way that you would read it, that you would see it, or the other person would read it and see it. So try to communicate with the person directly and have the list as a crutch, as a helping point when it does get too emotional. But if there's any other questions out there, Adrian and I are always available in the group. If you have any questions around it, please put it in the comments below the interview so we know what this is in regards to. Or if you find it too personal, please do feel free to reach out to either of us in a private message, okay? So I want to put that out there. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, holding space and sharing such beautiful ideas. And I'm going to let you wrap up the session today, Adrian. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, I think the key message, and you shared this, is the gentleness. Just be gentle with yourself, be gentle with your family members, be gentle with all those around you. And that word compassion, self-compassion and compassion for others. Because compassion is the word to use when there's grief. Absolute compassion. So let's I'd like to leave with a message of full compassion for everybody involved with the individual that's passed.
Thank you so much, and so much love to everyone listening to this. This is Adrian and Marie signing off. Bye for now. Thank you.